Whispers of a world of culture. London, England. A sleep storytelling journey through time. Breathe slowly. Close your eyes. Let the city come to you. There is a city at the edge of the world that breathes. Not loudly, not with the roar of engines or the clatter of urgent footsteps, but with the long, slow exhale of something ancient and continuous, something that has been breathing for 2,000 years. London. Whisper the name softly to yourself. Let it settle on the air like a leaf falling onto still water. London. A word that carries within it the weight of centuries, the murmur of 1,000 languages, the echo of boots on cobblestones, the distant chime of a bell tower reaching across rooftops into the grey and silver sky. You do not arrive in London so much as you are received by it. The city opens itself to you slowly, like a book you have been reading for a very long time, one whose pages you return to again and again, always discovering something you had not noticed before. Imagine arriving in the early evening, when the light is soft and the Thames, that wide, ancient river at the heart of it all, catches the last gold of the setting sun. The water moves slowly, deliberately, as if it, too, knows there is no reason to hurry. It has carried so much on its surface, the great wooden ships of merchants and explorers, the gondolas of royalty, the flat barges of fishermen who rose before dawn to pull their nets from the deep. You stand at the edge of one of its bridges, perhaps Waterloo, perhaps Blackfriars, perhaps one of the smaller, quieter crossings further west, and you look out across the city as the lamps begin to glow. One by one, like stars descending to earth, the lights of London come on. The street lanterns flicker. The windows of tall Victorian buildings warm with amber. A double-decker bus, painted that deep and familiar red, moves silently across the bridge behind you, its passengers resting their heads against rain-speckled glass. There is something in the air here that is difficult to name but impossible to miss. It is not simply the smell of the river, though the river is always present, cool and mineral and faintly briny, carrying the distant memory of the sea. It is not simply the faint dampness that clings to the old stones, or the particular quality of the light in this city, which is never quite the same from one hour to the next, shifting and softening and surprising you with sudden brightness even on days when clouds have gathered low and grey over the rooftops. No. What you feel in London is something deeper. It is the accumulated presence of every person who has ever walked these streets. Every medieval monk who carried candles through the fog. Every Tudor courtier who stepped from a river barge onto stone steps. Every Victorian flower seller who cried her wares beneath a gas lamp at dusk. Every immigrant who arrived with a single suitcase and a heart full of hope, who made this city their home and gave it something of their own culture, their own flavour, their own music. London holds all of them. The city is, in its own quiet way, a kind of living archive. You can feel it in the uneven pavement beneath your feet, where the stones have been worn smooth by generations of footsteps. You can feel it in the sudden narrowness of an alleyway that turns without warning, as if following the path of some medieval lane that no longer appears on any modern map. You can feel it in the way certain old churches stand stubborn and unchanged at the corners of streets that have been rebuilt again and again around them, their stone walls blackened with centuries of weather, their bells still marking the hours as they have done for hundreds of years. This city has burned and been rebuilt. It has flooded and recovered. It has been scarred by war and restored by hope. And through all of it, it has remained itself, complicated, generous, slightly eccentric, quietly magnificent. There is a particular kind of peace that descends on London late at night, when the last theatres have emptied and the last buses have made their long slow runs through the outer boroughs. The streets grow quiet, but they do not grow empty of feeling. If anything, the city seems more itself in these still hours, more concentrated, more present, as if the noise and movement of the day were only a surface beneath which something older and deeper had been waiting patiently. Imagine walking now through one of the older quarters, perhaps the lanes of the City of London, the ancient Roman heart of it all, after most of the offices have emptied for the evening. Your footsteps echo softly on the stone. The narrow streets are almost deserted. The buildings press close on either side. Here a gleaming modern tower of glass, there a stone wall that has stood since the 17th century, rebuilt after the Great Fire, its surface worn and textured by 300 years of weather and touch. A cat sits on a windowsill. Somewhere overhead, a pigeon shifts on a ledge. A distant church bell begins to toll, slow, resonant, each note dissolving into the cool evening air before the next one arrives. You count the strokes without thinking. 7. The evening is beginning. And what a city to begin an evening in. The lampposts are beginning to glow with their warm amber light, casting long soft shadows across the pavement. Somewhere along a narrow side street, a restaurant door opens briefly and the smell of roasting herbs and warm butter drifts out into the night before the door swings closed again. A couple walks past holding hands, their voices low, their footsteps unhurried. The city wraps itself around them like a coat. You feel it too, that particular embrace of London in the evening. The sense that you are being held, gently and without condition, by a place that has held so many people before you and will hold so many after. A place that does not require you to be anything other than what you are. You breathe deeply. There is a particular kind of traveller who finds London immediately overwhelming, and that is entirely understandable. The city is large and complicated and full of competing stimuli. But there is another kind of traveller, and perhaps you are one of them, who finds in London's very complexity a kind of relief. Here is a city that will never bore you. Here is a city that will never run out of things to offer. Here is a city that, no matter how many times you return, will find some new corner to show you, some new layer to reveal, some new quality of light on a familiar facade that you have never quite noticed before in exactly that way. Perhaps it is the particular grey-gold light of a London afternoon in October, when the sun is low and the plane trees are turning and the whole city seems to glow from within with a stored warmth that the summer left behind. Or perhaps it is the way London looks in the rain, and it does rain in London, quietly and persistently, without drama, when the streets are glazed and reflective and every lamppost casts a double image, one in the air and one on the wet pavement below. Or perhaps it is the silence that sometimes, unexpectedly, descends on a corner of the city that should by rights be full of noise. A moment when the traffic pauses and the birds take over, and you are standing in the middle of one of the world's great capitals and all you can hear is the wind in a chestnut tree and the distant, soft toll of a bell. These are the moments that London keeps in reserve for those who are patient enough to wait for them. This is London. This is where we begin. To understand London, you must first understand where it sits upon the earth. The city rests in the southeast of England, on the wide and fertile floodplain of the River Thames, roughly 50 miles inland from the sea. The land here is low and gentle, shaped over millennia by water. The Thames winds through it like a slow silver thread, looping and curving, its banks broad and its tides still felt this far from the open ocean, rising and falling each day with the pull of the moon. This geography is everything. It is the reason London exists at all. Long before the Romans arrived, before the city had a name, the Thames was already a place of significance. The people who lived here, the ancient Britons, moving through a landscape of dense oak forest and marshy riverbank, understood that the river was both a road and a boundary. It connected the interior of the island to the coast. It provided fish and fresh water. It drew communities to its shores. The river valley itself is broad and relatively flat, sheltered to the north by the low chalk hills of the Chilterns and to the south by the North Downs, two gentle ridges of higher ground that curve like cupped hands around the basin of the Thames. This natural bowl shape meant that the area was sheltered from the worst of the wind, that its soils were fertile, that water was always available. People have lived here for a very long time indeed. The first known permanent settlements in the area date back thousands of years, though the soft archaeology of this region, so often disturbed by centuries of building and rebuilding, makes precise dating difficult. Stone tools have been recovered from the riverbed, remnants of Neolithic and Bronze Age peoples who camped on its banks. There are traces, too, of Iron Age communities who built circular enclosures on the higher ground to the north and south of the river. But it was the Romans who looked at this place and saw a city. In the year 43 AD, the Roman Emperor Claudius ordered an invasion of Britain. His legions crossed the Channel and pushed north and west, eventually reaching the Thames. They needed a crossing point, somewhere the river was narrow enough to bridge, yet wide enough to allow the shallow-drafted boats of their supply fleet to navigate. They found it here, at a naturally elevated gravel terrace on the north bank, where the ground rose just enough above the floodplain to stay dry. They called the settlement Londinium. Within decades, a wooden bridge had been built across the river, and Londinium had become the hub of the Roman road network in Britain. Roads radiated outward in all directions, north to Eboracum, which we now call York, southeast to Dewberry, which we now call Dover, west and southwest toward the tin-rich lands of Cornwall. The Romans dug wells, laid drains, built a forum and a basilica that was, for a time, the largest building north of the Alps. The city grew quickly, as port cities do when trade is good and peace holds. Merchants arrived from across the empire, potters from Gaul, glassmakers from the Rhine, olive oil and wine from the Mediterranean, wool and hunting dogs sent back in return. Londinium was, from the very beginning, a city of exchange, not simply of goods, but of people, languages, and ideas. It burned, as Rome often burned. In roughly 61 AD, a queen of the Iceni tribe named Boudica led a great uprising against Roman rule and razed Londinium to the ground. The evidence of that fire, a thick layer of red ash, can still be found deep beneath the streets of the modern city, a buried scar, a reminder of how quickly and how violently things can change. The Romans rebuilt. They always rebuilt. They enclosed the city in a great defensive wall, sections of which still stand, visible if you know where to look, fragments of pale Roman brick and ragstone rising quietly from a garden here, a basement there, patient and enduring beneath the layers of everything that came after. When the Roman legions finally withdrew from Britain in the early 5th century, Londinium did not immediately fall. It faded, slowly, like a lamp running low on oil. The population dwindled. The great forum crumbled. The streets filled with weeds. For a time, the area known as Londonwick, a new Anglo-Saxon settlement, grew up slightly to the west, along the curve of the Thames near what is now the Strand. But the old Roman site was never entirely abandoned. Its walls remained. Its geography remained. And when the Vikings began raiding the coasts of England in the 9th century, King Alfred the Great recognized the strategic importance of the walled Roman enclosure. He reclaimed it, repaired the walls, and re-established a settlement within them. The river remained the reason for all of it. Ships could reach London from the North Sea and the Channel ports with relative ease. Goods could be loaded and unloaded on its wharves and distributed inland along the old Roman roads. Whoever held London held the arteries of trade. And trade was power. Think of the river at night, moving quietly in the darkness below the bridges, its surface carrying the reflections of lights that did not exist even a century ago. The same water, the same pull of the tide, the same patient movement toward the sea. The Thames has watched everything. It will watch everything still to come. And tonight, it watches over you. The geography also gave London something else, a certain ambiguity, a quality of being neither fully inland nor fully coastal, neither purely agricultural nor purely maritime. The city has always existed in a kind of productive in-between, one foot on the water and one on the land, one eye on the ships coming up the estuary and one on the roads heading inland. This betweenness is part of its character, the reason it has always been a place of meeting and exchange rather than of fixed and settled identity. The surrounding landscape shaped the city's expansion too. To the north, the clay hills of Highgate and Hampstead remained relatively unpopulated for centuries, their soils heavy and difficult to drain, their slopes too steep for easy building. This is why these areas retained their village character longer than almost anywhere else in the metropolitan region, and why, even now, Hampstead and Highgate feel subtly different from the rest of London, slightly elevated in every sense, their air a little cleaner, their streets a little quieter. To the east, the Thames estuary opened to the sea and the world. The great dockyards of Deptford and Woolwich, Tilbury, and the Isle of Dogs processed the trade of an empire. The ships that returned from distant voyages anchored in the reach below London Bridge, their holds full of spices and silk and cotton and tea, and the wealth they carried transformed the city that received them. Stand at the river's edge in the early morning, when the mist is still on the water and the light is grey and soft, and you can almost see all of it, the wooden hulls, the furled sails, the ropes and the rigging, the figures moving on the decks of ships that carried half the world's trade. The river is quiet now. Its commercial life moved elsewhere. But the water is the same water. The tide is the same tide. History in London does not sit in glass cases. It breathes beneath the pavement. After the Romans and the Anglo-Saxons, came the Normans. In 1066, William the Conqueror crossed from France, defeated the English King Harold at the Battle of Hastings, and changed the course of this island's history. He came to London almost immediately, for he understood, as every ruler before and after him would understand, that this city was the key. To hold London was to hold England. William did not destroy the city. He negotiated with its merchants and its people, granting them a charter that confirmed their ancient rights and privileges. And then, on the bank of the Thames, he began to build. The Tower of London rose slowly from the marshy ground beside the river, first a great square keep of pale currant stone, then expanding rings of walls and towers over the following centuries. It was fortress and palace, treasury and prison, and it stood as a statement of authority visible to every ship that came up the Thames from the sea. It still stands today, its stone worn smooth by time and river mist, its towers reflected in the dark water at night. The city that developed through the medieval centuries was dense, labyrinthine, and extraordinarily alive. Streets were narrow and unpaved, crowded with traders and pilgrims, livestock and apprentices, scholars and thieves. The great cathedral of St. Paul's, not the dome we know today, but an enormous Gothic structure with one of the tallest spires in Europe, dominated the skyline. Monasteries and convents lay scattered throughout the city and its surrounding villages. The Thames was lined with wharves and warehouses, and the river itself was thick with wherries and barges, ferrying passengers and goods from one bank to the other. The medieval city smelled of its river and its animals, its baking and its tanning yards. It was a city of guilds, the weavers and goldsmiths, the fishmongers and mercers, each with their own hall, their own ceremonies, their own sense of identity and pride. The guilds regulated trade, trained apprentices, supported their members in times of hardship. They were, in their own way, the city's social fabric, the invisible stitching that held the community together beneath the surface noise of commerce. Tudor London brought expansion and drama in equal measure. Henry VIII dissolved the monasteries and their great landholdings were parcelled out across the city, changing its physical shape almost overnight. The court at Whitehall was a glittering, dangerous world of patronage and intrigue, and the city that surrounded it fed on its energy. Printers and pamphleteers, portrait painters and instrument makers, all drawn toward the warmth of royal power like moths toward a candle. Then came fire. In 1666, a bakery on Pudding Lane caught light in the early hours of a September morning. The summer had been long and dry. The city's buildings, packed close together, were built largely of timber and thatch. The fire spread with terrible speed, driven by a strong east wind, and burned for 4 days. When it was finally extinguished, more than 13,000 houses had been destroyed, along with 87 churches and the great cathedral itself. But from the ashes, something extraordinary was born. The architect Christopher Wren was appointed to lead the rebuilding, and what he designed, elegant, rational, suffused with light, gave London a new face. His masterpiece, the new St. Paul's Cathedral, rose slowly over the following decades, its great dome becoming the symbol of the city's resilience and ambition. His smaller churches, dozens of them, each different, each quietly beautiful, were scattered throughout the rebuilt streets like pearls on a thread. The 18th century brought prosperity and expansion. London became the center of a growing empire, and the wealth that flowed through its streets was staggering. Georgian terraces rose in orderly rows to the north and west of the old city. Coffee houses became the intellectual centers of the age, places where merchants and philosophers, writers, and scientists sat side by side and argued about everything. The Bank of England was established. The stock exchange took shape. Newspapers multiplied. And then came the Victorian Age, and London grew beyond all previous imagining. The Industrial Revolution transformed the city at a pace that must have seemed almost incomprehensible to those living through it. Railways arrived, cutting great swathes through the urban fabric, connecting London to every corner of the country. The population exploded. Terraces and tenements spread outward in all directions. The sores were rebuilt, a monumental engineering achievement under Joseph Bazalgette that finally ended the cholera epidemics that had periodically devastated the city. The Underground Railway opened, the first in the world, carrying passengers in steam-hauled carriages through tunnels dug beneath the city streets. Through the 20th century, London faced its greatest trials and its moments of deepest solidarity. During the Second World War, German bombs fell on the city for 57 consecutive nights. Whole neighborhoods were flattened. St. Paul's Cathedral stood amid the flames and the rubble, its dome rising above the smoke, and this image, distributed around the world, became a symbol of something beyond endurance. It became a symbol of quiet defiance, of the city's refusal to surrender its identity even under the most terrible pressure. The city rebuilt itself again. And in rebuilding, it changed. People arrived from across what had been the British Empire, from the Caribbean, from South Asia, from Africa and the Far East, and they made London their home, weaving their own cultures and traditions and music and food into the fabric of the city. London became, over the second half of the 20th century, something genuinely new. A city unlike any other in the world, ancient and modern, familiar and endlessly surprising. Each era left its deposit. Each generation added its layer. The city grew not by erasing what came before but by building upon it, always upon it, the new rising from the old as naturally and as inevitably as a tree growing from the soil of a fallen one. History here is never truly past. It merely recedes, layer by layer, into the ground beneath your feet. And if you walk quietly enough, and listen carefully enough, you can still hear it breathing. London does not have a single face. It has thousands. This is one of the things that make it so endlessly absorbing to wander through, the way the architecture shifts and changes from one street to the next, from one neighborhood to another, each layer of the city's history visible in brick and stone and steel and glass, laid down like the strata of a geological record for anyone patient enough to read it. Imagine walking from the ancient walls of the City of London westward through Holborn and into Bloomsbury as the evening settles in. Your footsteps carry you through centuries in the space of a few miles. On one corner, a medieval church stands in the shadow of a glass tower that has risen behind it like a polished mirror reflecting the sky. A little further on, a Georgian terrace of pale stone and black iron railings runs along one side of a quiet square, its windows lit softly from within, a tall plane tree in the garden at the center dropping its autumn leaves onto the damp path below. These Georgian squares are among London's quiet treasures. Bloomsbury is full of them. Bloomsbury Square, Bedford Square, Russell Square, each one a little world unto itself, with its central garden and its surrounding terraces of uniform yet subtly varied townhouses. They were built in the 18th century for the prosperous middle classes, and they retain, even now, an atmosphere of calm and cultivation. The houses are tall and slender, their facades of London stock brick, that warm, slightly yellowish brick made from the clay of the Thames Valley, punctuated by elegant sash windows and restrained doorways framed in columns of painted timber. The plane trees deserve particular attention. London's streets and squares are lined with them in their thousands, and their presence gives the city a particular kind of seasonal beauty. In summer, their broad, deep green canopies form a continuous ceiling over the pavements, filtering the light into shifting pools of gold and shadow. In autumn, they turn amber and golden brown, and the fallen leaves gather in drifts against iron railings and along the gutters. In winter, stripped of leaves, their pale mottled trunks and angular branches are revealed against the grey sky, beautiful in a quieter, more structural way. Walk south from Bloomsbury toward the river and the city's character changes again. The Strand becomes more commercial, more theatrical. The churches of Wren appear, their white Portland stone steeples rising between the taller buildings with a kind of persistent dignity, as if reminding the city of what came before. St. Clement Danes, St. Mary le Strand, these are buildings that know they have outlasted much around them, and carry that knowledge with grace. Cross the Waterloo Bridge in the early evening and you are rewarded with what many consider the finest view in London, the river curving away in both directions, the dome of St. Paul's rising to the east, the Houses of Parliament with their spires and towers dissolving into the western light. The Palace of Westminster, that great Victorian Gothic confection of honey-coloured limestone, seems almost dreamlike at dusk, its clock tower called Elizabeth Tower, though the bell within it is forever known as Big Ben, reflected in the moving water below. South of the river, in Southwark and Bermondsey, you find a different texture again. This is the older, rougher face of London, the part of the city that was, for centuries, just outside the jurisdiction of the city authorities and therefore free to host everything the city itself preferred not to acknowledge. The theatres where Shakespeare's plays were first performed, the inns and alehouses, the workshops. Even now, the architecture here is harder-edged, more industrial, more honest in its origins. Victorian warehouses converted to apartments. Victorian railway arches converted to restaurants. The great brick bulk of the Tate Modern Gallery, once a power station, its enormous chimney rising above the riverside walk as a kind of monument to transformation. To the east lie the areas of Whitechapel and Spitalfields, where waves of immigration over 3 centuries have left their mark on every wall. A Huguenot chapel became a synagogue, then a mosque. Victorian terraces with elaborate facades front streets where market stalls have been set up for generations. The brick here is dark and worn, the streets narrower, the atmosphere more intimate. And then there is the West End, which is London's most polished face, the one it presents to the world. Mayfair's Georgian streets lined with embassies and art galleries. Regent Street's great curving sweep of stucco and Portland stone. Covent Garden's neoclassical piazza, where the old flower and vegetable market has become a covered arcade of shops and cafes, its vaulted ironwork roof letting in the grey London sky. Even in the newest parts of the city, the glass towers of Canary Wharf rising from what were once the docks of the world's greatest port, or the gleaming riverside developments that have transformed stretches of the South Bank. You can sense the river's ancient presence underneath, shaping everything. The residential streets of London's inner neighbourhoods have their own quiet beauty. The Victorian terraces of Islington and Hackney, their front gardens barely large enough for a rosebush, their bay windows catching the afternoon light. The arts and crafts houses of Hampstead, their tile-hung gables and small-paned windows suggesting a fantasy of the English countryside transplanted into the city. The wide stucco-fronted avenues of Notting Hill and Kensington, their cream-painted facades gleaming in the wet after rain. London's skyline is unlike any other city's. It has no single dominant height, no single moment of clarity. It is a conversation between centuries, crooked and beautiful and entirely its own. Stand on Primrose Hill on a clear evening and let your eyes travel slowly across it all. The dome of St. Paul's. The pyramid top of Canary Wharf. The Shard catching the last light like a splinter of glass. The green copper of the Natural History Museum. The dark towers of the Financial District. The infinite, irregular spread of rooftops and spires and chimneys extending in every direction toward a horizon you cannot quite see. Let your eyes drift slowly across it as the last light fades, and simply allow yourself to be held by it. There is one architectural detail that appears again and again across London's residential streets, and that, once you have noticed it, you find yourself looking for everywhere: the fanlight. These semicircular or elliptical windows set above front doors, their glass divided by slender lead bars into delicate geometric patterns, were a feature of Georgian and Regency architecture that served a practical purpose, bringing light into the hallways of tall, narrow townhouses, but that achieved, in the hands of the best designers, a beauty entirely out of proportion to their function. In the evening, when the hall light is on and the fanlight glows warm above a dark doorway, they seem to encapsulate something essential about the domestic architecture of this city. Functional, economical, and yet never entirely without grace. The Mews streets are another of London's quieter architectural pleasures. Originally built as stable blocks behind the great townhouses of the wealthy, these narrow cobbled lanes of low buildings were converted in the 20th century to the most desirable kind of London home. Small, private, unexpectedly quiet, their cobblestones and potted geraniums and flower boxes creating a village atmosphere in the middle of the city. On a summer evening, walking through a mews in Kensington or Mayfair, the city seems to recede, and you find yourself in something almost impossibly peaceful. The rhythm of London is one of the city's most quietly compelling characteristics. It is a rhythm that has evolved over centuries but retains, beneath its modern surface, something deeply familiar and continuous. The early morning. The middle of the day. The long, slow unwinding of the evening. Each part of the day has its own particular texture in this city, its own sounds and smells and social rituals. In the early hours, before the buses begin their routes, before the coffee shops unlock their doors, London belongs to the river and the birds. The Thames moves in its tidal way, unhurried, the surface catching the first pale light of dawn. Pigeons murmur on ledges. Somewhere, a tube train rumbles beneath the street, and the vibration travels up through the pavement in the faintest of tremors. The first people abroad are the market traders. In Covent Garden, in Borough, in Smithfield, there are men and women who have been awake since long before dawn, arranging fruit and fish and flowers, calling to one another in the easy shorthand of people who have worked together for years. This has been true of London for centuries. The city's day has always begun before most of its residents are aware of it. By 8 o'clock, the streets fill. Londoners move through their city with a particular kind of purposeful ease, not rushing exactly, but not dawdling either. They have learned to move through crowded spaces without apology or collision, to navigate the underground with eyes fixed ahead and minds already at their destination. There is a kind of artful impersonality to the morning commute, a collective agreement not to intrude on one another's quiet interior worlds. The Underground itself is one of London's most intimate and peculiar social spaces. People pressed close together in carriages that rattle through tunnels deep beneath the city, reading their books and their phones, studiously not making eye contact, and yet bound together by this shared subterranean passage beneath one of the world's great cities. There is something almost tender about it, if you look at it from a certain angle, all these people, carrying their private worlds through the dark, side by side. But the impersonality is not coldness. Spend a little time in any one of London's neighbourhoods, and you quickly discover its warmth. The Turkish cafe on the corner where the owner knows every regular by name. The newsagent who asks after your mother. The park where dog walkers pause to chat in the damp morning air, their dogs swirling around their feet in small social flurries. This is the London that visitors sometimes miss, the local London, the neighbourhood London, the London that exists at a human scale. The parks are central to London's daily life in a way that is perhaps unique among great world cities. Hyde Park, Regent's Park, Hampstead Heath, Primrose Hill, Victoria Park. The city is scattered with these great green spaces, and on any morning that offers even a suggestion of sunshine, Londoners pour into them with the enthusiasm of people released from a long captivity. Children run along paths. Office workers eat their lunches on the grass. Elderly couples walk arm in arm along the lake's edge. A jogger passes with earphones in. A student sits under a chestnut tree reading a book. The lunch hour is a social ritual. Sandwich shops fill with workers clutching their cards. Markets set up temporary tables under awnings. In the financial districts, men and women in suits lean against railings with paper cups of coffee, squinting into whatever light the sky has decided to offer. In the residential neighborhoods, quieter lunches happen in small cafes where the tables are close together and the conversations are low and comfortable. Afternoons in London have a particular quality of golden slowness, at least in the hours between the end of lunch and the beginning of the evening rush. The city breathes more gently in this interlude. Museums fill with afternoon visitors moving quietly through galleries. Bookshops have a different atmosphere at 3 in the afternoon than at any other time. Contemplative, unhurried, full of the particular pleasure of people who have given themselves permission to be nowhere else. The British love of the bookshop is a genuine and abiding thing. London's independent bookshops, Daunt Books in Marylebone with its Edwardian Galleria interior and its books arranged by country of origin, Persephone Books in Bloomsbury with its beautiful grey-covered editions of neglected 20th century fiction, the wonderful second-hand shops along Charing Cross Road. These are places of genuine pilgrimage for a certain kind of Londoner. Places where time moves differently. Evening is when London becomes truly itself. The pubs begin to fill, those ancient, warm, wood-panelled institutions that have served as the city's informal community rooms for centuries. There is something irreplaceable about the British pub. The low ceiling, the mismatched furniture, the shelves of glasses reflecting the warm light, the sound of conversations overlapping in a way that somehow creates privacy rather than intruding on it. Dinner is a slower, more considered affair in the evening hours. Restaurants fill gradually, tables occupied by couples and families and groups of friends, the conversations lengthening as the night deepens. On the street outside, the city continues, the theatres emptying and filling, the river glittering under bridge lights, a night bus making its slow way along an empty road past closed shops and sleeping houses. And finally, late and late, the city grows quiet. The last trains run. The last revellers make their way home. The river keeps its counsel, moving in the dark as it always has, carrying the city's reflection on its surface. Lights wavering, rippling, merging, dissolving, patient and beautiful and entirely indifferent to the hour. Somewhere in the city, a baby is being born. Somewhere, A light is still on in a study where someone is writing. Somewhere, an old person is sleeping in the same room where they have slept for 50 years, their breathing slow and steady, the sounds of the city they have known all their life murmuring softly outside the window. This is a city that never entirely stops being human. The city has a generosity that reveals itself slowly. It does not make grand gestures. It does not throw itself at you. But over time, if you let it, London will give you places, a particular bench in a particular park, a particular table at a particular cafe, a particular view from a particular bridge at a particular hour, that feel, somehow, like they belong to you. Not because you own them or have any claim on them, but because something in you has responded to them with such recognition that they have become part of your interior geography. Londoners know this. They each carry within them a private map of the city, overlaid on the public one, full of personal landmarks that would mean nothing to anyone else but that orient them within the city in ways that go far deeper than street names or postcodes. The tree where they sheltered from a sudden downpour on the day they got good news. The stretch of river where they walked when something was resolved. The cafe where they read a book that changed something in them. London is made, for each of its inhabitants, from the particular accumulation of their own experience of it. Breathe with it for a moment. Simply breathe. Follow the smell of warm bread and spice through a narrow London street on a Saturday morning, and you will understand something important about this city. London's food is the story of its people, of every wave of migration, every trade route, every borrowed recipe and adapted ingredient that has found its way into the city's markets and kitchens over the centuries. To eat in London is to taste history, without quite realizing you are doing so. Begin, perhaps, with the oldest tradition. The pie. London street food history is rooted in pies, small, hot, enclosed pastries that could be carried and eaten while working. The eel pie, once a staple food of the Thameside poor, made from eels caught in the river itself. The meat pie, sold from barrows in the medieval streets. The game pie, elaborately decorated and served at the tables of the wealthy. Pies appear throughout every class of London's culinary history, from the humblest to the grandest. And then there is the great British breakfast, that quiet daily ritual of eggs and bacon and toast and strong tea, which no length of continental influence has ever quite managed to displace. In a traditional London cafe, those small, formica-topped, steamed-up window establishments that have persisted in certain corners of the city with admirable stubbornness, the breakfast arrives quickly and without ceremony, served on an oval plate by someone who has made the same meal 10,000 times and made it exactly right. Tea, of course, deserves its own contemplation. The British relationship with tea is one of history's great love stories. Tea arrived in England in the 17th century and within decades had become the national drink, served at every social level from the grandest drawing room to the most modest cottage. In London, tea is still everywhere. In the great hotels of Mayfair, where afternoon tea is served with finger sandwiches and scones and small cakes arranged in architectural tiers, and in the humblest corner shop, where a strong, milky mug of it is pressed into the hands of anyone who looks like they might need it. Scones deserve their own quiet paragraph. Split open and spread with clotted cream and jam, still warm from the oven, served on a china plate beside a pot of tea. This is one of those small, uncomplicated pleasures that the English have somehow perfected over centuries of practice and that no amount of culinary sophistication has managed to improve upon. There is a rightness to it that goes beyond food. The markets are where London's culinary culture is most vividly alive. Borough Market, under the railway arches south of London Bridge, is perhaps the most famous, a dense, fragrant, gloriously crowded place where the produce of farms and forests and fishing boats from across Britain and beyond is laid out for consideration. Here you might find unpasteurized cheeses from Somerset wrapped in cloth, wild mushrooms gathered that morning from damp woodland, fresh pasta rolled at the stall in front of you, bread from sourdough cultures tended for years, honey from hives kept on London's rooftops. But Borough is only one of dozens. There is Portobello Road in Notting Hill, running on a Saturday through a long sequence of moods, antiques at one end, vintage clothing in the middle, the covered market roof giving way to open stalls of Caribbean food at the other, the smell of jerk chicken drifting on the damp air. There is Maltby Street in Bermondsey, quieter and more local, under railway arches where small producers set up simple stalls and the crowd moves slowly and without urgency. The cultures that have found their home in London over the centuries have added immeasurably to the city's table. The Huguenot refugees of the 17th century brought their fine pastry traditions from France. The Jewish communities of the East End established the salt beef bars and the bakeries of rye bread that still persist in corners of Whitechapel and Golders Green. The mid-20th century arrivals from the Caribbean and South Asia transformed the city's relationship with spice, with color, with warmth. In the decades since, the city's food scene has bloomed in every direction. Restaurants representing cuisines from every corner of the globe have found their footing in London's neighborhoods. Ethiopian injera and Japanese ramen and Levantine mets and West African groundnut stew, all of it present, all of it genuine, all of it part of the city's ongoing conversation with itself about who it is and where it comes from. The riverside experience of eating in London deserves mention too. On a summer evening, with the Thames visible from a restaurant window, the light still lingering long after 9 o'clock in the particular way of English summer evenings, there is a quality to a simple meal, a glass of something cold, something fresh from the water, that feels like one of the most civilized things a city can offer. The cheese shops of Neal's Yard in Covent Garden, the chocolate makers of Bermondsey, the gin distilleries that have multiplied across the city in recent years, the craft beer taprooms tucked under Victorian railway arches. London's artisan food and drink culture is one of the great pleasures of the contemporary city, a revival of craft traditions that connects the modern city back to its long history of small-scale making and selling. At the end of an evening, after theatre or a long walk along the river, there is perhaps no more comforting sound in London than the quiet sizzle of a fish and chip shop still open late, its steam curling into the cool night air, its paper-wrapped parcels warm in your hands as you walk slowly home through the lamplit streets. The city feeds you, in every sense. There is also the matter of the London pub lunch, that particular midday institution that has nourished workers and wanderers and writers and philosophers for centuries. A good pub lunch is a study in restraint and satisfaction, a plate of something simple and well made, a glass of something cold and honest, a table by a window overlooking a courtyard or a street that has been here since the 18th century. No hurry, no performance. Just the fundamental pleasure of good food in a good room in a good city. The city's relationship with coffee has deepened considerably in recent decades, as a generation of independent roasters and cafe owners has transformed the coffee culture of London from something merely functional into something genuinely artisanal. The cafes of Shoreditch and Bermondsey and Brixton serve coffees with the same seriousness that a good restaurant brings to its wine list. The sourcing of the beans, the temperature of the water, the texture of the milk, all of this is attended to with a care and a passion that would have seemed eccentric 20 years ago and now simply seems like the right way to do things. Let that warmth settle over you now, soft as a blanket, as the sounds of the evening kitchen, the gentle bubble of something on the stove, the low murmur of conversation, fades slowly into silence. London is a city that understands the importance of ceremony, not in a stiff or joyless way, but in the manner of a city that has had many centuries to learn which rituals carry meaning, which traditions give the community a sense of continuity and shared identity, which moments of collective celebration remind people, in the midst of ordinary life, that they belong to something larger and older than themselves. The ceremonial life of the city runs on a calendar that stretches back centuries, layered and accumulated like the city itself. Consider the changing of the guard at Buckingham Palace, that slow, unhurried ritual of marching soldiers in scarlet tunics and tall bearskin hats, accompanied by a military band playing everything from traditional marches to occasionally and with entirely straight faces, television theme tunes. The ceremony has been performed, in various forms, since the 17th century. It draws crowds every morning not simply because of spectacle, but because there is something genuinely affecting about the persistence of form, the way these precise, repeated movements connect the present to an unbroken chain of past performances stretching back through history. The Lord Mayor's Show is older still, one of the world's oldest and most colourful civic processions, first held in the 13th century. Each November, the newly elected Lord Mayor of the City of London travels through the ancient streets in a gilded state coach, accompanied by a procession of floats, military bands, historical reenactors, and representatives of every trade and guild associated with the city. The streets fill with people pressing close to the barriers, wrapped in scarves against the November chill, the sound of brass and drums rolling between the stone facades of the buildings on either side. Guy Fawkes Night, the 5th of November, is another ceremony that reveals something deep about London's character. In 1605, a group of conspirators attempted to destroy the Houses of Parliament. They were discovered. And ever since, on the anniversary of the failed plot, the city marks the occasion with bonfires and fireworks, a ritual of memory that has been kept alive for over 400 years. From the hills and commons of London, you can watch the fireworks rise and fall in the November darkness, their reflections shivering on the surface of the Thames. Spring brings a different kind of celebration. On the second Saturday in June, the streets of central London are closed to traffic for the annual Trooping the Colour, the official celebration of the Sovereign's birthday. This is perhaps London's most elaborate and visually stunning ceremony, a precision-drilled display of military pageantry involving hundreds of soldiers, dozens of horses, and the slow progress of the royal family in open carriages through streets lined with cheering crowds and the soft thunder of cannon salutes echoing across the park. But not all of London's festivals are ceremonies of state. The city is equally alive with more popular, more spontaneous traditions of celebration. Notting Hill Carnival, held each August bank holiday weekend, is the largest street festival in Europe, a two-day explosion of Caribbean music, costume, and culture that transforms the streets of West London into something between a parade and a party. The sound systems begin in the morning and the music, soca and calypso and dancehall and steel pan, fills the air until the evening sky is purple and the streets are thick with colour and movement. The Chelsea Flower Show, held each May in the grounds of the Royal Hospital Chelsea, draws garden lovers from across the world to admire extraordinary displays of horticultural art. Entire landscapes created in the space of a week, with waterfalls and ancient trees and meadows of wildflowers arranged in the grounds with a care and skill that is almost otherworldly. The scent of roses and sweet peas hangs in the spring air. People move slowly from display to display with the reverent pace of museum visitors, speaking in hushed tones about plants as if they were old masters. The Oxford and Cambridge boat race, held each spring on the Thames between Putney and Mortlake, draws tens of thousands of spectators to the riverbanks to watch the two great universities contest their annual race on the water. It is one of the great outdoor gatherings of the London year, informal, cheerful, organised around the simple pleasure of watching 8 men or women row very hard for about 20 minutes. The river looks magnificent on a clear March morning, the water flat and slightly silver, the trees along the bank just coming into leaf. Even the quieter, less visible traditions have their beauty. The way the city decorates itself at Christmas, the lights along Oxford Street and Regent Street stretching overhead in long, warm arches of gold and white, the great Norwegian Christmas tree that stands each year in Trafalgar Square, a gift from the Norwegian people in gratitude for London's support during the Second World War, its lights visible from a long distance in the December dark. The night air carries the scent of cinnamon and mulled wine from a market stall. Somewhere, a choir is singing. The buildings are lit from below, and their stone facades glow as if from within, and the city feels, for a moment, not like a place of millions of people and centuries of complexity, but simply like a lantern, warm and bright in the winter dark. There is also the quieter tradition of Remembrance Sunday, the second Sunday of November, when the city pauses. At 11 o'clock in the morning, for 2 minutes, an extraordinary silence falls. The traffic stops. People stand still wherever they happen to be. On pavements, in parks, in shops and offices. The silence is total and absolute, held by 9 million people at once, a collective act of memory that is unlike anything else the city does. Then the church bells begin again, and life resumes. But for those 2 minutes, something very still and very deep passes through the city like a breath. There is also the tradition, informal, unannounced, but deeply felt, of Sunday morning in London. The city is never entirely quiet on a Sunday morning, but it is quieter than any other time. The streets of residential neighborhoods have a particular stillness about them. The corner shop is open, most other things are not. Families walk to the park. A church bell sounds from somewhere nearby. Someone is cooking something that smells good. The particular London Sunday morning smell of someone's roast beginning in an oven, drifting out of a kitchen window into the cool morning air, is one of the most purely comforting sensory experiences the city offers. London observes its traditions with a kind of gentle stubbornness, not rigidly, not without change, but with a commitment to form that suggests a city that knows the value of continuity. In a world that changes very quickly, there is something profoundly calming about a city that still, every morning at a certain hour, sends soldiers in scarlet tunics to march in formation outside a palace. That still, every November, lights fireworks to mark the same date it has marked for 400 years. That still, every Sunday, bakes its roasts and walks its dogs and sits in its cafes reading its papers. Breathe slowly. Let the lantern glow inside you. Every city has a creative pulse, but London's is something extraordinary, layered and diverse and constant, a river of art that flows through the centuries without ever running dry. Begin in the 16th century, on the south bank of the Thames, in the neighborhood of Southwark. Here, in the unruly and energetic space just outside the city's formal jurisdiction, a young playwright from Stratford-upon-Avon found his audience. The Globe Theatre, a circular wooden structure open to the sky, held 3,000 people, standing in the yard or seated in the galleries, who came to watch plays of such psychological complexity, such linguistic beauty, such human truth, that we are still watching them, still finding new things in them, 400 years later. William Shakespeare's London was a city of theatres and stories. Other playwrights worked alongside him, Christopher Marlowe, Ben Jonson, John Webster, and the theatrical culture they created was vibrant and hungry and utterly central to the life of the city. Theatre was not then, as it is sometimes perceived now, a high cultural preserve. It was popular entertainment, attended by everyone from apprentices to aristocrats, raucous and immediate and alive. That spirit of theatrical life has never left London. The city's West End is the home of one of the world's great theatre cultures, a dense cluster of playhouses along Shaftesbury Avenue and the Strand and the surrounding streets, where plays and musicals and operas and dance performances run simultaneously, a kind of permanent festival of performance that has persisted for centuries. On any given evening, you might walk along these streets and hear, through an open stage door, a snatch of music, a burst of applause, a single voice carrying a line of dialogue out into the cool night air. Music runs through London's history with equal force. In the 16th and 17th centuries, it was the music of the church and the court, the complex polyphony of Thomas Tallis and William Byrd, the sacred harmonies that filled the cathedrals and chapels with sounds so layered and rich it seemed to make the stone itself vibrate. Then came the great orchestral tradition, Handel making London his home and composing works of such power that they still fill the city's concert halls. The annual prom season at the Royal Albert Hall, running from July to September, fills that great domed Victorian auditorium night after night with orchestras from around the world performing everything from Beethoven to newly commissioned works. And then, in the 20th century, London ignited. The 1960s brought a cultural explosion that reverberated around the world. The clubs of Soho and Carnaby Street, the recording studios of Abbey Road, the coffee bars of Fitzrovia, from these unprepossessing places came music that changed everything. David Bowie grew up in Brixton, South London, and from his earliest records to his last, his music carried the city in it. Its strangeness, its acceptance of the unconventional, its capacity for reinvention. Punk arrived in the mid-1970s and was, in many ways, the most purely London of all musical movements. Confrontational, irreverent, scornful of pretension, made by young people from the city's less celebrated neighborhoods who used noise and energy and expression to say something true about their experience. After punk came a flowering that continued decade after decade. Post-punk, new wave, acid house, jungle, drum and bass, grime. Each one a distinctly London music, born from specific neighborhoods, specific communities, specific moments in the city's social and demographic history. Grime, which emerged from East London in the early 2000s, is perhaps the most recent example of this phenomenon. A music born directly from the estates and streets and particular energy of a specific London at a specific moment, that went on to reshape British popular culture entirely. Artists like Dizzy Rascal and Wiley and Skepta carried something irreducibly London in their sound, their language, their references, the bus routes and the street names and the weather of a city that is always present in the music it makes. Visual art has found London equally hospitable. The great museums and galleries, the National Gallery, the Tate Modern, the Victoria and Albert Museum, house collections of extraordinary breadth and beauty. But the art scene is not confined to these grand institutions. It lives in the commercial galleries of Mayfair and East London, in the street art that transforms railway arches and bridge supports into open-air exhibitions, in the studios of thousands of working artists scattered throughout the city's more affordable corners. The Tate Modern deserves its own quiet attention. Housed in the former Bankside Power Station, a massive industrial building on the south bank of the Thames whose turbine hall alone is large enough to contain small forests of sculpture, it opened in 2000 and immediately became one of the most visited art galleries in the world. There is something deeply satisfying about what it represents, the transformation of industrial power into cultural power, the repurposing of a building that once generated electricity for the city to now generate a different kind of energy entirely. Literature, too, has found its home here across the centuries. Chaucer and Milton, Samuel Johnson compiling his dictionary in a house in Gough Square, Charles Dickens walking through the Victorian city's fog and poverty to fill his novels with its faces, Virginia Woolf moving through Bloomsbury with a mind like a river, continuous and shifting and uncontainable. The city has inspired and shaped so much of what we consider English literature that the two seem inseparable. To read the great novels and poems of the English language is, in many cases, to walk through London at a particular moment in its history. Creativity is simply what this city does, in all its forms, at all hours. Even now, late at night, somewhere in London, someone is painting or writing or playing or composing. The city never entirely sleeps, and neither does its imagination. The Royal Academy of Arts, the Barbican Centre, the South Bank Centre, these are the larger institutions of London's cultural life, and they anchor the city's identity as a world capital of the arts. But between and around them exists a vast ecosystem of smaller venues, independent cinemas, community theatres, music clubs, and galleries and arts centres, each serving a specific community, each adding its particular note to the city's creative chord. The jazz clubs of Soho, Ronnie Scott's in Frith Street, open since 1959, its red walls and dim lighting unchanged in spirit if not entirely in detail, the music still wrapping itself around you like smoke, are among the most atmospheric places in London. To sit in a jazz club late at night in Soho, with a glass in front of you and the music so close you can almost feel it vibrate in the table, is to participate in a tradition of listening and making that connects this moment to every other night this room has held music, stretching back across the decades in an unbroken thread of sound. London does not hold its creativity lightly or politely. It holds it the way the city holds everything, with a slightly disheveled generosity, a willingness to make room, an understanding that culture is not a luxury but a necessity, as necessary as the river, as persistent as the stones. The best of London is not always visible from the main roads. You have to slow down. You have to be willing to follow a lane simply because it narrows invitingly around a corner, to stop because a doorway or a courtyard or a view down an alley catches your attention. The city rewards slowness and curiosity in a way it never rewards hurry. Imagine following a side street off the Strand in the early evening, before the theatre crowds have gathered but after the office workers have dispersed. The street narrows. The sound of traffic fades. You find yourself in a courtyard, perhaps one of the ancient Inns of Court, where the buildings press close in a companionable way, the flagstones are uneven beneath your feet, and a single lamp casts a small circle of warm light onto the damp stone wall beside you. You might be in the 18th century. You might be dreaming. The distinction, in a moment like this, is barely relevant. London's hidden courtyards are among its most lovable secrets. They exist in the strangest places, tucked behind department stores, accessible through archways that appear to lead nowhere, concealed by buildings that seem, from the street, to present a solid and unbroken face. There are bombed-out churches whose walls have been left standing and whose interiors have become gardens, vines climbing the roofless nave, trees growing where the congregation once stood. These sanctuaries exist quietly in the middle of the city, known to those who live nearby and to the fortunate wanderers who stumble upon them. The street markets are equally various and equally revealing. Brick Lane in the east, once a place where French silk weavers settled, then a centre of Jewish life, then the heart of Bangladeshi London, and now something of all three and more, runs on a Sunday morning with a mixture of vintage clothing stalls, bagel shops open through the night as they have been for generations, curry houses, and the persistent remnants of each community that has made the street its own. On Portobello Road, the Saturday market begins almost apologetically, with a few early stalls of silver and old books at the Notting Hill end, and then builds and thickens as you walk north. More silver, then ceramics, then 20th century furniture, then vintage clothes filling the covered arcades under the bridge with their dim, particular atmosphere of discovery. Further north still, beneath the motorway overpass, the mood changes entirely. Music from speaker stacks. The sizzle and fragrance of Caribbean cooking. Bright color everywhere. There are quieter markets, too, for those who prefer them. Columbia Road Flower Market, in Bethnal Green, opens only on Sunday mornings, occupying a single street of Victorian shops that fills, between 9 and 2, with cut flowers and potted plants and the shouts of the flower sellers. A trade still conducted in the theatrical, sung-out fashion of old London markets, the sellers competing for attention with wit and volume. The street smells extraordinary, roses and hyacinths and eucalyptus and damp earth, all at once, under the grey Sunday light. The cafes of London deserve their own quiet attention. Not the coffee chains that have multiplied on every high street, but the older, more individual places. The Italian espresso bars of Soho that opened in the 1950s and have barely changed, their chrome machines still gleaming, their walls still hung with black and white photographs of Rome and Naples. The tea rooms of Kensington and Chelsea, where a pot of tea and a slice of cake are still served with a certain ceremony, the cups properly warmed, the milk presented separately. Soho itself is one of London's most endlessly fascinating neighbourhoods, a dense square mile of streets that has been, at various points in its history, home to aristocrats and immigrants, artists and craftsmen, musicians and writers, and that retains, even in its contemporary form, something of all those identities at once. The streets are narrow and the buildings are low by central London standards, and this gives the neighbourhood a particular intimacy, a sense of being held within something smaller than the surrounding city, something more human in scale. Walk down Berwick Street on a weekday morning and the fabric market stalls are still there, rolls of cotton and silk and velvet arranged on outdoor tables, the traders calling to one another across the narrow street. Turn a corner and you might find yourself in front of a shop front that has barely changed since the 1960s. A record shop, a tailor, a small Italian restaurant with handwritten menus in the window and red-checked tablecloths visible inside. And the pubs, always, in any discussion of London street life, the pubs. The best of London's pubs retain their Victorian interiors intact, the etched glass screens, the mahogany bar, the tiled floor, the small snug where a couple might sit in comfortable privacy. In the evening, these places fill with a particular warmth and sound, the low murmur of many conversations, the clink of glasses, the occasional burst of laughter from a corner table. The alleys and passages that crisscross the older parts of the city, the narrow lanes whose buildings lean slightly toward one another overhead, whose cobblestones still bear the wear of centuries. These are the places where London's true character is held most carefully. No tour bus reaches them. They exist in a kind of permanent quiet, a remove from the city's pace, as if time here moves on a different scale. At night, in these narrower places, the city has a particular beauty. The cobblestones shine with moisture. A lamp throws warm light onto old brickwork. From a window above, the sound of music, something slow and instrumental, barely audible. A cat moves silently along a ledge and disappears around a corner. There are stretches of the Thames Path, that long-distance walk that follows the river through the city and out into the countryside beyond, that are among the most beautiful urban walks in the world. The south bank between Westminster Bridge and Tower Bridge is the most famous, lined with galleries and theatres and restaurants, and the great Cathedral of Southwark rising above the rooftops of the older buildings behind. But there are quieter stretches too, the riverbank in Hammersmith, where tall Georgian houses look across the water at the boathouses on the opposite bank, or the stretch at Putney where the river is wide and tree-lined and the water is green and you can almost imagine that you are not in a city at all. In these quieter places, London reveals another of its gifts, the ability to offer solitude within community, space within density, the sensation of being alone with your thoughts even in the midst of millions of people. This is not something every great city manages. It requires a certain kind of physical generosity, parks wide enough and long enough that you can lose yourself in them, streets quiet enough at the right hours that your footsteps are the loudest thing, rivers broad enough that standing beside them you feel, for a moment, the same kind of expansiveness that standing beside the sea provides. You stand still for a moment. You breathe. And the city breathes with you. London has always been a city of arrivals. From its earliest days as Londinium, the city drew people from beyond its borders, merchants and soldiers, refugees and adventurers, people seeking safety, people seeking opportunity, people who simply followed the river to its mouth and kept going. This has been true without interruption for 2,000 years, and it is perhaps the most essential and defining truth about the city. The Huguenots were among the most significant early migrations in the post-medieval period. French Protestants, fleeing religious persecution following the revocation of the Edict of Nantes in 1685, arrived in London by the tens of thousands and settled primarily in Spitalfields, just beyond the old city wall. They brought with them the silk-weaving skills for which they were famous, and the terraces of elegant Georgian houses they built in Spitalfields still stand today, perfectly preserved, as testament to their prosperity and taste. At the corner of Fournier Street stands a building whose history traces the entire arc of London's multiculturalism in miniature. Constructed as a Huguenot chapel in 1743, it became a Methodist chapel, then a synagogue serving the Jewish community that settled in Spitalfields in the 19th century, and then a mosque, serving the Bangladeshi Muslim community that arrived in the 20th century. The same building. The same address. A different community at prayer in each era. The Jewish community's contribution to London's character is deep and varied. Arriving in multiple waves, medieval, then again after the expulsion from other European countries, then in enormous numbers from Eastern Europe in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Jewish Londoners built institutions and businesses, contributed to every field from medicine to music, from law to the garment trade, and shaped entire neighborhoods. The salt beef bars of Brick Lane, the bagel shops that still open through the night, the Yiddish words that have drifted into East End slang, these are all evidence of a community that made itself at home and left its mark indelibly on the city. After the Second World War, the patterns of migration shifted decisively. The British Nationality Act of 1948 gave citizens of Commonwealth countries the right to settle in Britain, and people came, from the Caribbean, from India, from Pakistan, from West Africa, from Hong Kong. The Windrush generation settled primarily in South London, in Brixton, in Stockwell, in Peckham, and transformed those neighbourhoods in ways that continue to reverberate today. Brixton became a particular centre of Caribbean London. Its market, its music scene, its community organisations, its churches. The carnival spirit that arrived with those early settlers eventually grew into Notting Hill Carnival, the great annual celebration that has become one of the defining events of the London calendar. The music that developed in the Brixton clubs and on the sound systems, reggae and ska and rocksteady and eventually jungle and drum and bass, was unmistakably London music, created in the encounter between Caribbean tradition and the city's particular urban energy. Communities from South Asia settled in other parts of the city and brought with them their own transformations. The curry house, as it evolved from the early Bangladeshi and Indian restaurants of Brick Lane and the areas around Paddington, became as much a part of London's identity as the pub. Diwali celebrations fill the streets of Wembley with colour and light. Sikh communities in Southall maintain their temples and their festivals. The sound of Bhangra music drifts from a wedding hall on a Saturday afternoon in Harrow, mixing with the sound of church bells from a nearby steeple. In more recent decades, London has received new waves of immigration from across the European Union, from Poland and Romania and Bulgaria and Portugal, communities that have settled in particular neighbourhoods and brought their own flavours and their own traditions, their own bakeries and their own Catholic churches. Polish delis in Hammersmith. Portuguese cafes in Stockwell, known to locals as Little Portugal, where the smell of custard tarts, pastel de nata, drifts from the bakeries onto the pavement on a Sunday morning. The result of all this layering, 2,000 years of arrivals, of communities making their home beside other communities, of cultures brushing against one another and mixing and sometimes conflicting and ultimately enriching each other, is a city of staggering diversity. Walk through London on any given day and you might hear 30 languages before lunchtime. You might encounter a Polish delicatessen next to a Jamaican bakery next to a Japanese ramen bar next to a traditional English pub. You might see, in the course of a single walk, a mosque and a synagogue and a church and a Hindu temple, each conducting their affairs in their own language, each embedded in their community, each part of the whole. The schools of London reflect this diversity most vividly. In a primary school classroom in almost any inner borough of the city, you might find children whose parents or grandparents came from 20 or 30 different countries, who speak different languages at home, who celebrate different festivals, and who are, nonetheless, unmistakably Londoners, sharing the same accent, the same references, the same affectionate attachment to their city. This is London's great achievement, fragile and imperfect as all human achievements are, but genuine. A city that has learned, over many centuries, how to hold within itself the extraordinary complexity of the world. Breathe that in quietly. Let it settle like peace. The neighbourhoods of London are, in themselves, a kind of catalogue of the world. Tooting in South London, where the street market sells tropical fruits and spices, and where the restaurants of the tooting Broadway Road offer authentic South Indian and Sri Lankan food of extraordinary quality. Dalston in East London, where Turkish supermarkets and Kurdish cafes sit alongside Vietnamese restaurants and a Ukrainian cultural centre. Golders Green in North London, where the Jewish community has maintained its bakeries and its synagogues and its delis for a century, and where on a Friday afternoon the whole neighbourhood moves toward the weekend with a particular sense of quiet anticipation. Each of these neighbourhoods is a world in miniature. Each has its own social rhythms, its own particular sounds and smells, its own relationship to the city around it. And yet each is also, unmistakably, London, connected to everything else by the underground lines and the bus routes and the river and the long, continuous story of a city that has always known how to make room. The city's diversity is not a recent phenomenon, though its particular contemporary form is new. It is the latest expression of something that has been true of London since Londinium received its first merchant ships from the wider Roman world, that this city has always been a place where people from elsewhere have been able to arrive and, over time, make themselves at home. The city absorbs and is absorbed. It changes those who come to it, and it is changed by them. Modern London holds its contradictions lightly, with a kind of long-practiced ease. It is, simultaneously, one of the most ancient and one of the most contemporary cities in the world. The Roman walls still stand in their fragments behind glass in underground car parks and in office building basements. And 20 feet above them, the glass towers of the 21st century rise into a sky crossed by aircraft, their windows reflecting clouds and light and the ever-changing face of the Thames below. The city that Londoners inhabit today is a place of extraordinary technological and social change happening in extraordinary proximity to the deep past. A software engineer commutes to work in Shoreditch through streets where, 3 centuries ago, silk weavers worked their hand looms. A chef in a restaurant that draws on the food traditions of 3 continents works in a kitchen that might stand on the site of a medieval herb garden. A schoolchild in Peckham whose grandparents came from Nigeria carries within her the history of one of the oldest trade relationships on earth. London has positioned itself, by geography, by temperament, by long habit, as a city of global connection. Its financial district handles trillions of dollars of transactions each day. Its universities draw students from every country on earth. Its cultural institutions, the Tate Modern, the British Museum, the Royal Opera House, are as internationally attended as any in the world. Its airports handle more passengers than almost any other city. And yet, for all this, London remains stubbornly, lovably itself in the details. The red bus, the black cab, the tube map, designed in 1931 and barely changed since, its elegant colored lines bearing no relationship to geographic reality but achieving a beauty and legibility that has made it one of the most admired graphic designs in the world. The persistent British habit of forming an orderly queue. The conversation about the weather that is never entirely only about the weather. The city faces its challenges with the same complicated mixture of pragmatism and exasperation that has characterized its response to every challenge in its long history. Housing is scarce and expensive. The gap between the city's richest and poorest inhabitants is wide. The river that made the city's fortune now faces new pressures, higher tides, more extreme rainfall events, the ever-present reminder that this city was built on a floodplain. And yet the city also innovates, recycles itself, finds new uses for old spaces. The South Bank, once a derelict stretch of industrial wasteland, has become one of the great cultural riverside walks of the world. The East End's old docks, redundant since containerization moved the port activity downriver, became first the gleaming office towers of Canary Wharf and then, in their smaller corners, the studios of a new generation of artists and makers. Every decade, Some neighborhood that had seemed to have no particular distinction discovers a new purpose and a new identity. This capacity for reinvention is one of London's defining characteristics. The city has remade itself so many times, after fire, after flood, after war, after economic transformation, that reinvention has become almost its natural mode of being. It approaches change not with fear but with a pragmatic curiosity, an acceptance that nothing is permanent and that nothing needs to be permanent because what matters, the river, the accumulated memory, the complex community, persists through all the changes that happen above it. The green spaces continue to be one of the city's greatest gifts to its residents. In a city of this size and density, the fact that you can walk from Kensington Palace through Hyde Park to Regent's Park and onward across Primrose Hill to Hampstead Heath, a continuous green corridor of several miles, seems almost miraculous. These spaces are not merely parks but something closer to commons in the old sense, land that belongs equally to everyone, where the barriers of class and neighborhood dissolve, where the only rule is to move slowly and look carefully. Walk through Hampstead Heath on a clear autumn morning and you will understand why Londoners love it with such fierce attachment. The land rises and falls in a way that is unusual in this flat city, and from the top of Parliament Hill the whole of London is laid out below you. The dome of St. Paul's, the towers of the city, the Shard, the slow curve of the river. The grass is damp with dew. A kestrel hovers above the long grass on the slope below you. The city is out there, but it is held at a distance, and you are here, in the wind and the light, and the morning is very still. London's relationship with its own history is evolving, as it always has. Conversations are happening, sometimes uncomfortably, sometimes productively, about whose stories have been told and whose have been overlooked, whose monuments stand in the public squares and whose contributions have gone unrecorded. The city is asking new questions of itself, looking back at its own past with fresh eyes, and finding, as it has always found, that the past is more complicated and more interesting than any simple telling of it allows. Walk through the city on any ordinary day, not a festival day, not a historic occasion, but simply a Tuesday afternoon or a Sunday morning, and what you see is a place going about the business of being itself with remarkable self-possession. People eating and walking and working and resting. A group of schoolchildren running across a park toward a pond where ducks sit impassively on the water. An elderly woman reading a newspaper in a cafe, her coat buttoned against the chill, her tea going slightly cold beside her. A city of 9 million people, each living their particular and irreplaceable version of a London life. And somewhere, in a room above a shop or on a bench beside the river or at a window looking out over a rooftop garden toward the pale bulk of a dome in the distance, someone is writing something, or drawing something, or simply thinking, adding their own small contribution to the vast and ongoing archive of this extraordinary place. There is a quality to the light in London on a clear winter morning that is unlike the light anywhere else, low and white and slightly diffuse, coming from a sky that is pale blue at the zenith and almost silver at the horizon, giving the city a kind of luminous, clean clarity that you do not see in summer. The stone buildings seem to sharpen and define themselves. The river goes dark and pewter grey. The bare trees stand in clean silhouette against the pale sky. It is a beautiful light, unsparing and honest and, in its own way, deeply warming, the way that clarity can be warming. London in winter, when the tourists have thinned and the city has settled back into itself, can be the most purely Londonish of all the versions of London. The markets are quieter. The parks are more contemplative. The pubs are fuller and warmer and more domestic. The city pulls inward slightly, like a living thing preparing for cold, and in doing so reveals something about its essential character. The warmth at the center of it, the community that persists beneath the surface of its famous reserve, the kindness that appears when appearances are set aside. The city continues. It always has. It always will. We have walked a long way tonight. Through Roman streets and medieval lanes. Through Georgian squares and Victorian markets. Along the Thames at dawn and at dusk, watching the water carry its centuries of memory out toward the sea. Through the creative energy of Soho and Brixton and Spitalfields. Through the quiet courtyards of the Inns of Court. through the lantern-lit streets of a city that has been burning its lights for 2,000 years. And now, at the end of this long and gentle wandering, let us rest here for a moment, perhaps on one of the stone benches at the south end of Waterloo Bridge, where the view opens in both directions and the river is wide and dark and the city's lights are reflected in its surface like a second and slightly more dreamlike London, wavering beneath the real one. What is it, in the end, that London gives you? Every person who has spent time in this city will answer that question differently, because London is large enough and various enough to offer something different to everyone who comes to it. For one person, it is the sense of history, the extraordinary compression of time that the city embodies, the way you can move in an afternoon from the ruins of a Roman wall to a medieval great hall to a Victorian market to a 21st century gallery and feel, in each place, the city's accumulated layers of human experience pressing gently on you. For another, it is the sense of community within complexity, the remarkable thing that London achieves by being a home to so many cultures and communities, the way it holds within its boundaries the traces of almost every place on earth, so that in some streets you feel you are simultaneously in London and in the Caribbean, in London and in Lagos, in London and in Lahore, in London and in Warsaw. For another still, it might be the creative life, the theatres and galleries and music venues and bookshops and street art and recording studios, the sheer density of creative activity that this city generates and houses, the sense that wherever you are in London you are never very far from something being made. And for many, it is simply the river. The Thames is London's constant. Everything else, the buildings, the streets, the communities, the cultures, is layered on top of it and around it. But the river itself was here before any of it and will, in some form, be here after it all. There is great comfort in that. To stand beside the Thames at night, watching the water move in its eternal, tidal way, is to be reminded that cities are temporary arrangements, beautiful and complex and deeply human, but temporary. That is not a sad thought. It is, somehow, a comforting one. Because what it means is that all the beauty you have encountered in this city, all the architecture and music and food and ceremony and kindness and creativity and diversity, is precious precisely because it is temporary. It is what human beings have made, in this particular place, at this particular moment in the long story of the world. It is theirs. And for as long as it exists, it is yours to walk through and breathe in and carry with you. London will leave something in you that doesn't wash out easily. It has a way of doing that. People come for a week and return for years. People arrive as visitors and gradually, without quite deciding to, become residents. People who grew up here and moved away find themselves, at odd moments in distant cities, feeling a sudden, inexplicable pull, not quite homesickness, but something close to it, a memory of a particular quality of light on a particular street, a certain smell of rain on warm stone, the sound of a bell tower marking the hour somewhere in the middle distance. This is what cities do when they have made themselves well, when they have accumulated, over centuries, enough human experience and enough physical beauty and enough strangeness and enough ordinariness to become something more than a place. They become a feeling. They become a country of the mind that you can visit whenever you close your eyes and reach for it. London is that kind of city. And tonight, you have walked through it slowly and quietly, and some part of it has walked with you, and some part of you has stayed behind, sitting on a bridge watching the dark water move below, listening to the soft wind along the river, watching the lanterns cast their warm circles on the wet cobblestones of a street that has been here, in one form or another, for 2,000 years. London will be there in the morning. The river will still be moving. The pigeons will still be turning circles above the dome of St. Paul's. Somewhere, a bakery will be opening its doors and the smell of warm bread will drift out into the cool morning air. The tube will be running. A bus will be crossing a bridge. Someone will be standing at a window with a cup of tea, looking out over the rooftops at a sky that could be any color at all, grey or pearl or the palest, most tentative gold, and feeling, as people in this city have felt for 2,000 years, that they are exactly where they are supposed to be. Let that feeling settle over you now. Like morning light coming slowly through an old window. Like the sound of a river you cannot quite see but can hear, moving somewhere just beyond the edge of awareness. Like the deep and patient breath of a city that has seen everything, survived everything, and is still here. Still here. Still breathing. Still London. And if you return, as so many do, as so many will, you will find it waiting for you with its usual magnificent indifference, going about its centuries-old business of being one of the most extraordinary places on earth. The river will be moving. The bells will be marking the hours. The markets will be selling their bread and their flowers and their peculiar miscellany of beautiful things. The pubs will be lit and warm. The parks will be turning with the season. The streets will be carrying their daily freight of human lives, each one a story, each one irreplaceable. You will step off a train or a plane or a bus and feel the particular air of the city on your face, that cool, damp, faintly mineral air that carries in it the smell of the river and the stone and the rain, and something in you will settle, quietly and without fanfare, like a key turning in a lock. You are here. You are back. London has been waiting. Thanks for watching. What culture would you like to learn about next? Comment below. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. See you on the next one.